2020, prospective leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, told us we can put factionalism and division on one side and unify around a radical programme where we can draw on the talents and strengths of all our members across the movement. In this programme, we examine what actually happened.
Thank you so much to those people who have put their faith in me and voted for me today. I promise you that I will not let you down.
Make sure you vote Labour today, vote Paula Barker.
I went on a loud hailer, travelling around in a car around one of the poorer parts of the CLP, persuading people, encouraging people to vote Labour. And of course we went leafleting and knocking on doors because we had some faith that the new MP was going to keep a word.
So what I want to say is thank you to your friendship and your comradeship that you have shown me since I was selected to be your candidate.
She was voted in on a Corbyn ticket, and we saw how long that lasted, didn't we?
It was once said that Jack Jones was the greatest Prime Minister that this country never had. Sadly, with the national results, I think that is now Jeremy Corbyn.
She had written an article effectively agreeing with the narrative, with the story, that the disagreements, the differences between ourselves in Wavertree and Luciana Berger were motivated by anti-Semitism. And, we were genuinely angry, we were upset about that because those were out and out lies. 4 members of the constituency executive approached our MP, Paula Barker. We told her that our views, we told her that it was wrong, and she more or less dismissed those arguments. So 4 of us then produced a letter which we put into an internal bulletin of the Constituency Labour Party. That bulletin was a monthly bulletin. It was being produced for several months during the lockdown. It was a wide-ranging forum for political discussion, and we distributed it to members. Now, some of our opponents, some of the right in the party, leaked that to the Liverpool Echo, to the Jewish Chronicle, and indeed some former left-wingers then used that as a basis of attacking us.
I consider her a sister, if you like. We called each other sis all the time. I was very, very fond of her. I was really shocked when the Wavertree 4 was suspended. I was very, very disappointed because all of those people, the 4 of them, were good anti-racists, campaigners on the left, really fighting, really put their all into getting her elected for a start, but also for supporting Jeremy Corbyn. So I was horrified, and I actually thought, very naively, that Paula Barker would do everything to pedal back from a situation that was heightening, which was resulted actually in their suspension. I thought she would do everything she could to stop that from happening. And I think lots of people in the movement, I spoke to lots of people, leading people in the movement who'd been behind her, who were shocked and disappointed at what she did in the end, because she played a role in the suspension of those good socialists.
And I think people recognise that. They recognise that Wavertree was the tip of an iceberg, that if you're attacked for trying to hold your MP to account, if you're attacked for trying to make your MP support a Labour government, then you're traduced in the media, you're slandered by Tom Watson as an anti-Semite. Issues of Middle East politics did not come into it whatsoever. Our constituency had backed Luciana Berger in the horrible racist slanders that were directed against us by the far right, not by members of the Labour Party. So I think it became a cause célèbre. That's why I think people rallied around us. That's why people were supporting us. It wasn't individual. We were just 4 active members of a Labour Party which had been in the news. And comrades said, thus far and no further. We've had enough of these attacks, we've had enough of these slanders, we're not going to put up with it anymore. I supported Paula. I had I remember sitting in committee meetings where she talked about the issues of Palestine, the oppression of the Israeli state. She described her visits to the West Bank, and she talked, very sympathetically about the oppression of Palestinian children by the Israeli state. So I saw her as someone who was going to stand up for the rights of Palestinians, but also was going to stand up for the rights of working class people in Liverpool, and indeed stand up for the constituency party against the sort of slanders that have been used against us. But unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. And unfortunately, many people who were formerly on the left have begun the witch hunt against us. The person who, for example, sent the official complaint, Mark Hoskinson, is a former left-winger, a former Trotskyist, someone who, if you read his writings from the 80s and the 90s, was a firm defender against Stalinism and political oppression. And he now, in a sense, is joining in a very Stalinistic way. So he's gone from writing about Stalinism to actually practicing it. We could put this down to careerism. Many of them have now got jobs as advisors. Mark Hoskinson is a chief of staff to a local MP. But I think it's more to do with their lack of political perspective. I still believe in socialism. I still believe in the power of the working class to change society. I don't believe in careerism. I don't believe socialism can be achieved by hiding our politics and by cooperating with the capitalist system. Because, of course, the story here isn't just a battle between left and right. It's a story of the soft left, those who are willing to compromise, those who are willing to turn on former comrades and attack. That's what the story is here in Wavertree.
The Wavertree Four were all eventually expelled for spurious reasons, but not anti-Semitism. The reason given for Kevin Bean being expelled was that he was a communist.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it. If a person consistently reads and advocates the views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist. If a person supports organizations which reflect communist teachings, or organizations labeled communist by the Department of Justice, she may be a communist. If a person defends the...
Are you now a member of the Communist Party?
Oh, please, please, please.
Please answer, will you, Mr. Robeson?
What is the Communist Party? What do you mean by that? Would you like to come to the ballot box when I vote and take out the ballot and see?
Mr. Chairman, I respectfully suggest the witness be directed to answer the question.
You are directed to answer the question.
I invoke the Fifth Amendment and forget it.
You are directed to answer,
Gentlemen, in the first place, wherever I have been in the world, the first to die in the struggle against fascism were the communists. I laid many wreaths upon the graves of communists. That is not criminal. The Chief Justice Warren has been very clear that the Fifth Amendment does not have anything to do with the inference of criminality, and I invoke the Fifth Amendment.
Have you ever been known under the name of John Thomas?
Oh, please. Does somebody here want to put me up for perjury someplace? John Thomas. My name is Paul Robeson, and anything I have to say, I have said in public all over the world, and that is why I am here today.
Mr. Chairman, I ask that you direct the witness to answer the question. He's making a speech.
I'm not going to be like a lot of those people in the 1950s and 60s who took the Fifth. I'm not a member of the Communist Party, but what I am is a socialist, I'm a Marxist, and I'm a fighter for class politics in the British Labour movement. And there are loads of people like me in the British Labour movement who are fighting for socialism, and there are loads of people like me who are being expelled and suspended for fighting for socialism.
Thanks, Kevin. And before that, we saw Tayo Aluko as Paul Robeson in a reenactment of the infamous McCarthyite trials that purged communists and activists in America in the 1950s. Kevin Bean's expulsion did not stop him campaigning.
The one-stop shop provides an information and advice service about council services to local people. And it's absolutely vital for those parts of the community that don't have easy access to information online or by mobile phones. Now, we know that the Tories just want to cut back, and particularly they want to attack communities like this one. But the important thing here is that these cuts are being implemented by a Labour council, and nothing is being done by that Labour council to fight back. So we're part of a campaign that's made up of trade unions, community groups and socialist activists. I'm the expelled secretary of Wavertree Constituency Labour Party, and a number of the people who are on this protest are either suspended from the Labour Party or have been put under pressure by the right-wing leadership. And it's that right-wing leadership which is also carrying out these cuts. So why I'm joining this protest is to begin that fight back to defend a very vital service.
Stop the cops! Save the one-stop shop! Stop the cops! Save the one-stop shop! Stop the cops! Save the one-stop shop!
We're lucky to have another member of the Wavertree 4 in the studio today. Hazuan Hashim is also the producer for this programme. So Hazuan, what's it like being outside of the Labour Party?
I feel great. Liberated.
Following the expulsion of the Wavertree 4, some Labour Party members continued to campaign in the party. Because of the pandemic, meetings were held by Zoom. I asked Paul Philby what the meetings were like.
I wouldn't really know, because the two Zoom meetings I tried to attend, as soon as I opened my mouth, the chair hit the button and cut me out the meeting. So I can assume by that there probably isn't much meaningful debate. All I was doing was pointing out to the chair he couldn't make the rules up. He couldn't change, didn't have the authority to change the rules that were stated in the rule book. And his response was to cut me out the meeting by hitting the big red button.
There wasn't time. I put a Julian Assange motion to support Julian Assange, to campaign against his extradition, to not extradite him, to write to Starmer, to say this is what we think, this is what we want the Labour Party to do. And that was taken down by, would you believe, an amendment of fake news, saying, oh no, some guy stood up and said, no, I think we should amend this motion to say Julian Assange should be extradited to Sweden, where he's wanted for offences, sexual offences. And we need to amend this motion to say that. It went to the vote. I asked to come back on that. I wasn't allowed to come back. So my only option at the end, I pulled that motion. The Julian Assange motion fell. It then became, our minutes became fake news because there was no opposition allowed in that meeting. Therefore, what ended up in the meeting was that Julian Assange is wanted for sexual offences in Sweden. They dropped wanting to speak to him by that time. He was never charged with anything. We all knew that. I wasn't allowed to say it. And the chair basically said to me, that's in the minutes. That's what happened in the meeting. So the meeting, the faked, baked meeting was baked into the minutes.
Before that, we used to have excellent debates where the left, if you like, would win nearly all the arguments with great support, very progressive. But obviously the old right wing and the people who like power, that doesn't suit them. They only like democracy if they're in control of it. Like any dictator would, really. That's how dictatorships work. They believe in minority rule. And sadly, that's the Labour Party these days.
You know, I can do shorthand. So I did take some notes at one meeting. There was a great comment and question put to MP Paula Barker, who's disappointed us all. A comrade asked her, when is she going to acknowledge the witch hunt? And how many more members will it take before she admits? This brings us no nearer to bringing down a pernicious, murderous Tory government.
I've been wanting to ask you a question for some time, so I'm pleased to have this opportunity because who knows, I could be suspended and this might be my last chance. The way things are, at the moment in the Labour Party. You will be aware that on page 27 of the EHRC report, Article 10, we are protected as Labour Party members to express opinions about internal party matters. So first of all, I want you to know that I agree with everything Jeremy Corbyn said in his response to the EHRC report. I also agree with the contents of the polite but critical letter that 4 members of this executive, who unfortunately are no longer with us, wrote to you. What I don't agree with is your deafening silence over the witch hunt that is happening in the Labour Party. So my question is, at a time when Keir Starmer seems more interested in attacking Labour Party members than the Tories, at a time when a 23-year-old footballer called Marcus Rashford seems to be leading the opposition to the Tories, when people are leaving the party in droves, do you believe that every time someone leaves the party or is suspended or expelled, that Labour moves closer to bringing down this pernicious, murdering Tory government? How many more members of Wavertree CLP would you like to see suspended?
And she comes back basically saying she couldn't give a shit whether he or whoever is inside or outside the Labour Party, as she'll still be the Liverpool Wavertree MP for him, her, whoever, and we can always email her. These are Labour Party members she's talking about, comrades that supported her. She said,
Okay, so on that, Phil, I mean, it's never your last chance because I'm the Labour MP for the whole constituency. So whether or not you're a Labour Party member, you can always email me and ask my opinion on things and I will reply. I think the EHRC report should be adopted. I'm not going to comment on individual disciplinary matters because as a trade unionist, I firmly don't comment on individual disciplinary matters. And I think we have massive challenges in the party to be relevant.
Those are my notes from the meeting. My question to her would be, what about the Ford report, Paula? What about the information in the Ford report, the way it's been delayed, the way you're not there to sign in support of Jeremy Corbyn, and asking where is the Ford report? They worked against Labour Party members, Labour Party democracy, to lose the 2017 election. We all watched that coach coming home. We all watched the crowds. We were all there, out there at Corbyn meetings. It was massive, thousands of us. So is that not relevant to Labour Party democracy and to your constituents?
Not long after asking my question to Paula Barker, I received 2 notices stating that I was under investigation by the Labour Party. I was eventually expelled for probably being a member of the group Labour Against the Witch Hunt.
I think that freedom of expression and debate is the lifeblood of the Labour movement, of the Socialist movement. If we can't hold our MPs and our leaders to account, if we can't freely express differences, then there's really no point in having a movement. So what we have here is an attempt to stifle political opinion, but perhaps more importantly is to go along with a narrative which is used by the right, it's used by the Tories, it's used by their friends in the media to stifle discussion and opposition on what are admittedly, difficult and complicated issues, but they're also basic issues of free speech, of party democracy. So what's happened to us has happened to hundreds, maybe thousands of people. And it's an attack by the right of the Labour Party, and as I said, they're supporters on the so-called soft left. So these are really quite fundamental questions of politics about the right to discuss, to put forward your ideas and to disagree, and above all to hold MPs and others accountable. it seems here that any criticism of an MP is almost like those in the medieval times of lèse majesté, that you can't criticise the monarch because in some way you're interfering with their authority.
I live in Wavertree. I used to live in Egbert, and I used to use Park Road one-stop shop a heck of a lot when I was unemployed. I'm working now, and to sort housing benefits out, to sort all sorts of stuff out. Problems that had gone wrong, underpayments, overpayments. The one-stop shop is vital. And, I know from being on the dole, I can't afford to get a bus across town. How are older people going to get across, miles across town if they're going to cut these one-stop shops down to 2 hubs? This isn't fair. It's got to be local. Not everyone's on the internet. Save the one-stop shops, stop the cuts, let's have democracy. We don't want Tory commissioners in Liverpool. Is it £800 a day they're on? This has got to stop. Enough now.
After enthusiastically campaigning for Paula Barker, Paul Philby and Minnie Stacey voted with their feet and left the party in disgust.
If you're elected, your job is to represent the people who elect you and to change the system so the system meets the needs of those who elect you. But nowadays, we don't represent, we manage people. When you're elected now, your job is to change the people so they fit the system which runs the world. And the difference between representation and management is very strong, and people don't feel represented anymore. They feel they're being managed. So they get cynical and angry. And I think you'll never make progress until this is explained to people, so at least they know what they're up against, and at least then see the best way forward. But there's been a fundamental erosion of what you might call the democratic principle, that the laws are made by the people you elect, you can remove, and who therefore have to listen to. And the second thing is, of course, the Labour leadership have gone along with that. New Labour have gone along with all that.
And I know that if we're going to do it, it has to be modelled from the top. I've run an organisation where I've changed values and culture. You have to model it from the top.
I joined in 2016. Do you know, I can remember I was in work and we knew Ed Miliband was stepping down and people were talking about Jeremy Corbyn, and I knew of Jeremy Corbyn because of his anti-war work, and he was always the one who spoke out against brutal welfare cuts and things like that, but he was sort of considered just backbench, a bit of a Tony Benn type figure. And then when it became sort of, this is a possibility, he's actually in the running here. As with everyone, I think in Liverpool especially, we just embraced the Corbyn movement massively, and it was the first time in a long time where we'd all had hope. What you were seeing then was people who aren't not the same old faces that you saw at rallies and demos and in your trade union meetings. It was the people from round the corner, like the lady from round the corner who does a bit of volunteer gardening in the park, and they were going out and door knocking. They believed as well, and it was just, we've got hope, finally something to hope for, and we can change things, because again we were coming off the back of 6-7 years of austerity that was having a horrendous impact in our communities, and you're looking at the food banks were growing.
After the change in leadership of our party last year, John McDonnell announced a different economic strategy, and he called it out for what it is. Austerity is a political choice, not an economic necessity. And that political choice is being made on the backs of cuts all over the country, made on the backs of growing inequality.
Coming together, working together, not blaming each other or blaming minorities. That gives us hope, that gives us opportunity, that gives us a world of justice, peace and human rights. Thank Thank you very much indeed.
When it became clear, obviously after the 2017 election, and just how scared they were, the right wing, that how close we came, and it's something that for all of us, I think, obviously it's something you just look back and it's devastating. It is. It's devastating that we were a couple of thousand votes away from being in power, from having this Labour government, and I don't think any of us were as naive to believe that would have been it, and it would have been like this fabulous Corbyn utopia. We knew that the battle would start there and would escalate, but we'd be in power and we could start to make the changes that we desperately need. But as we sort of, after that, then it became much clearer the line the party was going to take then to ensure that never happens again, and that Jeremy Corbyn or anyone on the left ever got that close to those positions of power again.
In the lead-up to the election of a new Labour leader, Keir Starmer's campaign video referenced him as a champion of workers in struggle. He'd assisted the print workers in their struggle against Murdoch. He was on the side of the miners. He supported poll tax protesters. When he came to Liverpool to outline his leadership credentials, he was keen to be associated with the legacy of Jeremy Corbyn and Labour's Radical Manifesto.
And don't trash the last 4 years, because what Jeremy Corbyn brought to this party, he made us an anti-austerity party that stood against cuts, a party that wanted to invest in public services, the party of the Green New Deal, and that was in our manifesto. And we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater here.
Starmer had 10 pledges that were remarkably similar to Labour's manifesto. He knew that in order to get elected, he would have to reinvent himself as a radical. What we didn't know at the time is that a multimillionaire pro-Israel lobbyist donated $62,000 towards his leadership election campaign. Starmer kept this secret until after he'd won the party leadership. Unsurprisingly, following Starmer's election, the Labour Party hired a former Israeli spy, Asaf Kaplan, to help manage its social media and work in Starmer's office. Kaplan was in Israeli military intelligence for nearly 5 years, an officer in Unit 8200's, its cyber warfare branch. Unit 8200 specialises in spying, hacking and encryption. It carries out blackmail, mass surveillance and systematic discrimination against Palestinians. During his time as Director of Public Prosecutions, he was ideally placed to prosecute the bankers who were responsible for the financial crisis in 2008. Instead of serving up justice to the bankers, he picked on the poor, and in 2013 delighted his Lib Dem and Tory coalition political masters by demonising so-called benefit cheats. After using the alacrity of a used car salesman to get elected, Starmer swiftly dumped his pledges. Under his leadership, the party with the largest membership in Europe turned on its own members and launched an unprecedented witch hunt against them. Since his tenure, thousands of members have left or been kicked out for spurious reasons, and the party is now facing a financial crisis. I asked former Labour councillor Jo Bird if she thought Keir Starmer had damaged the party.
Sir Keir Starmer has done a lot of damage to the Labour Party. He's made promises that he hasn't kept. He was elected on that basis. He's pursued a witch hunt, which is against the principles of human rights that he knows inside out, having formerly been a human rights lawyer.
And
And on behalf of millions of Jewish people around the world, we say, not in our name. The violence of the apartheid state of Israel reminds me of stories from my family when we suffered lynchings and pogroms and had to flee to other countries.
Jewish members of Jewish Voice for Labour are 31 times more likely to face disciplinary action for talking about the racism we face, for talking about anti-Semitism, than other members of the Labour Party. That's an indication of institutional racism. The fact that the witch hunt has accelerated under Keir Starmer is a bad sign, that it's disproportionately picking on Jewish people as well as other socialist people. Jeremy Corbyn was right when he said the scale of the problem was also dramatically overstated for political reasons. I've repeated that. I was under investigation for saying that just before I was at the local elections when I was re-elected. It's just a catalogue of deceit, dashed expectations, active witch huntery. You know, he should go.
I think it was on the Friday that Jo Bird had gone public with that she'd been expelled, and I just thought enough is enough. I've worked with Jo on a few things on the Socialist campaign group for councillors, and I have massive respect for her. She is an exceptional councillor, anti-racist campaigner, and she devotes her life to that, and the reasons that they've expelled her are just absolute nonsense, that they can be allowed to try and tar someone's name like that. But his objective was to get rid of anyone connected or who joined because they were inspired by Corbyn and who were part of the Corbyn project, and to become some sort of Uber Tony Blair, like a remodelled.
The attacks on Jeremy Corbyn in that election we've just had were terrible, and they came back at us on the door.
One of the things that Keir Starmer's been really good at, however, in the midst of this massive crisis of COVID and racism and environmental destruction, what he's been really good at is purging the Labour Party of Jewish socialists like myself and other Jewish people and other socialists like myself. He's managed to change the rules and apply them retrospectively. He's managed to ignore all the processes of natural justice.
It was to remove any remnants of socialism, wasn't it? And that seemed to be his brief coming in as leader, was not to oppose the Tories. I mean, I think he's probably given more support to the Tories throughout the pandemic than some backbench Tory MPs have, which is pretty shocking.
This city has been wounded by the media. The Sun in this city, a hurt for this city. And I certainly won't be giving any interviews to the Sun during the course of this campaign.
When he wrote for The Sun and the dismissive way he refused to apologise or refused to accept the impact that would have on a city like ours, for me that was deliberately provocative. He's decided that if he can show that he's crushed Liverpool, basically, then he can do what he wants. And it became clear that was his objective to me. It was starting to keep me awake at night, to be honest. Like, I was having anxiety attacks, and just staying in the party was making me sick. And I've got like a lot of health conditions that are stress triggered. I was like, why am I doing this to myself? What am I achieving? And it's difficult to stay in. It's so difficult to stay in and to have to try and justify that to people whose opinions you respect, but who are saying, well, why are you staying in, why are you doing it to yourself? You set yourself these lines in the sand. If this happens, I'm going to have to leave, and how am I going to go and face me members if I'm voting through budget cuts like that? As a PCS rep and activist, our major campaign at the moment is a cost of living campaign. How can I go and vote through budget cuts that are going to hugely impact people's lives, and yet I'd be asking people to vote in a ballot. Yet vote in this ballot, say yes, this is what we want to challenge the government on. It's ridiculous, and it makes a mockery of me and the work I'm doing.
The impact of any witch hunt is to attack democratic debate and frustrate dissent. This was evident in the latest budget agreed by Liverpool City Council. It turned out to be an attack on the poor and vulnerable in the city. Before the meeting, I asked Councillor Anna Rothery if she was going to support the cuts proposed by the Labour Party in the budget.
The Labour Party is completely removed from the party that I joined as a teenager. I've been an elected member for the last 16 years. It's become increasingly difficult to align myself with the party. It doesn't represent my ethos or my values anymore. But more importantly, it's because I wanted to be able to be vocal on the cuts. And I feared that if I stayed within the party, that I would actually be silenced. Everybody's talking about the green bins, but the reality is our elders who are already struggling, with the rise in fuel costs, etc., how are they expected to make any payments towards their health and social care? The money's just not there.
Finally, I think we have the beginning of opposition to this from our councillors, who really have just played a very compliant role. And we need them to stand by us as pensioners, because we will be paying the price. We're already facing cuts from the tax from this government, attacks over the last years, the closure of the one-stop shops, and all this social care. The cuts to social care will affect pensioners more than anybody.
Everybody knows I've been quite vocal about the £10 million that's been ring-fenced for the commissioners to do their best value exercise. Recently, they've just had a 50% increase in salary that was backdated to July. It kind of flies in the face of what is all right and good and decent when somebody's sent here to do a best value exercise, but then decides to give themselves an increase of 50% and backdate it. In fact, it's bordering on obscene when you see the state of the way people are living in this city. We've got children going to school on empty stomachs with no breakfast. It is pretty appalling to see that people are then giving themselves £1,500 a day plus expenses for hotels and travel.
Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, please be of silence to receive the Right Worshipful Lord Mayor of Liverpool, Councillor Mary Rasmussen.
But don't you dare attack us with some of that, because I will go back to the history there. And what happened then? The militant tendency walked into this city and they wrecked the city. Yes, of course they built houses. Yes, of course they built council houses. But I can tell you what, the stuff that we had to deal with year on year, decade after decade, because of what they did, that you left as an open door and they came straight through the middle. And what you've got here is, you've got a strong...
And I can't comprehend why Socialists would want to increase reserves by £10 million in the city. Well, let me explain something here. What the ordinary man and wife and families are going to be facing under this Tory government over the cuts that they've made. Let me explain it. Day to day, nothing that they're going to get that is lovely or it's something that they just want to go out and buy. Let's just say toilet rolls, an increase of 6.5%. Let's just say a tin of beans, an increase of 13%. No, sorry, 17.6%. If you look at frozen chips, an increase of 24.1%, and I could go on and on and on. There we are. What are we doing? We're taking it out on the most vulnerable. I've heard it time and time again, the most vulnerable are going to be looked after. First of all, Councillor, what's her name? Corbyn, sorry.
George, Councillor Nib.
Councillor, what's her name? Councillor, what's her name? Actually had the cheek to attack the 49 that run this city.
George, can I ask you to bring it to a close, please?
Sorry, Lord. Can I have 2 minutes extension? Thank you. Thanks, Lord Mayor. So let me say this. Attacked people that built thousands of houses, that attacking people that created 1,000 jobs.
I just want to place on record, and I don't want to say this, it isn't an attack, but I'm appalled sat at this side of the chamber watching behaviour out of people laughing and giggling when people are allowed freedom of speech and their opinion, and that's what politics is about, democracy. And all I'm seeing is people shaking their heads and giggling and laughing, and I'm really uncomfortable with it, and I just wanted to say it. Thank you for the time.
It was extraordinary to see the Mayor and Deputy Mayor laughing at George Knibb when he described the impact of the hike in the cost of living on his constituents who were living on a low income. He told me that he felt relieved that he'd left the party. I asked councillors Joe Bird and Sarah Morton how they felt when they were no longer members of the Labour Party.
I joined the Labour Party in 2015 because of the mobilisation that Corbyn brought with him for socialism. So I know there's a life outside the Labour Party, but for some people it's truly devastating. You know, there's even been early deaths as a result of it. And that's really not okay. Members of the Labour Party deserve much better treatment, and we're not getting it under this leadership. And for a lot of people that have put their own mental health first, which is completely okay, and resigned, stopped paying the direct debit, moved on to other things. Some people have been expelled, which in my experience has been the best way to go.
So it was just a massive weight off, and I'd done it at like 2:00 in the morning, so no one could talk me out of it. So it's like, I'll do it, and then I've done it, and then I'm done, and it is probably the best decision I've made for myself in a long time, to be honest with you. So don't regret it for a single minute.
Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. Ni le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal.
There is a significant difference between the McCarthyite era and what is happening now in the Labour Party. Today, there is no right to meet with your accusers and to defend yourself. The witch hunt is part of a wider campaign to curb freedom of speech and the right to protest. Starmer's thought police have embarked on an Orwellian attack on the membership. Part of the evidence used against me was this photograph of myself and my partner and producer Hazuan Hashim and Ken Loach. You will remember that Ken was expelled because he would not disown those already expelled. He said, "I am proud to stand with the good friends and comrades victimised by the purge." There is indeed a witch hunt. Starmer and his clique will never lead a party of the people. We are many, they are few. Solidarity. Well, Ken was on a previous episode of this programme, so it's unsurprising that the entire production team have been expelled. What the Labour Party and the establishment are afraid of is socialism. So here is Ken Loach again, frightening the establishment with the ideas they'll never succeed in suppressing.
If you look at the state of how people live and how society has developed really over centuries, you see that this is a society based on a conflict, an inherent conflict between those who own and control and determine what we produce, how it's produced, and whose interests it's produced, and those who do the work, those who have to sell their labour. There's a conflict of interests. Those who in charge of production do it for profit, and that means they have to have the cheapest labour they can get that'll do the job. The interests of people is that they have a secure job and good wages that they can live with dignity. And there's a conflict of interest. And that, as this present system has developed, has got worse and more intense, so that now in a country where there's great riches, we have massive poverty, homelessness, areas that are desolate, where old industries have gone. So we see that inequality, we see that inefficiency, we see above all the destruction of the planet, which isn't planned. And socialism is about common ownership, a planned economy, where what is produced is for the benefit of all and takes care of all, as opposed to the chaos of the market. So that's why we need socialism.
Tariq Ali was in Liverpool recently to promote his excellent book, The 40-Year War in Afghanistan, A Chronicle Foretold, published by Verso. I asked him what he thought of the demise of Jeremy Corbyn and the performance of Keir Starmer since he was elected as leader of the Labour Party.
Now, under Starmer, you will probably have the most right-wing Labour Party we've ever had. That's the reality. I mean, suspending Corbyn, the Socialist campaign group, too scared to do anything. I mean, I argued with some of them. I said, the minute Corbyn was suspended, you should have voluntarily suspended yourselves and said, we will only work with him until he's taken back. What other way is it? An injury to one is an injury to all. But oh no, they pleaded with Corbyn, some of them. Just apologise for what you've done. And Corbyn knew if he apologised, his whole reputation was gone. There are 30 or so MPs in the SCG. Even if 20 agree to get suspended, form yourselves in Parliament. There are another 2 or 3 years to go as the peace and justice grow. And if things get really bad in the Labour Party, then stand in your own constituencies again. That is the way politics should be played.
This programme is made by the Art of Resistance, a collective of artists and film activists who seek to give a voice to the many and not just the few. They are unpaid, but this programme still needs support to cover costs. If you can, please consider making a donation to keep this programme going. Go to the Art of Resistance website if you would like to make a donation. You can also help by sharing this programme on social media. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Karen. You can also buy original art from the Art of Resistance website, which again will help us to keep producing these programmes. We leave you with a final comment from Kevin Bean and the words of Paul Robeson, played by Tayo Aluko.
I was fortunate enough a few weeks ago to look at an online seminar which had taken place in Washington, D.C. And this online seminar had a number of quite important contributors. And there were such luminaries as Michael Gove, Lord John Mann, the renegade Labour MP who's now working with the Tories, Mike Pompeo, any number of luminaries from the American political and military establishment. But of course, the most important luminary from my point of view was Luciana Berger, our former MP. And she launched an attack upon the politics of the left. She said that our anti-imperialism, our opposition to the aggressive policies of the Israeli state, that these were all part of a sinister anti-Semitism. But perhaps more importantly, she said that people like me, who stand up for socialism, are opposed to political freedom. And why I think this seminar was important is that it's part of an attempt to delegitimize any opposition in Western societies, so that opposition to military intervention, opposition to economic oppression, opposition to inequality, opposition to any sort of attempt to restrict criticism in this society is deemed illegitimate. So I think that this attack upon free speech and party democracy is only part of a wider attempt to close down all sorts of oppositional ideas. If anybody dares to criticise, if anybody dares to suggest that this is a witch hunt inside the Labour Party, if anybody dares to suggest that the status quo isn't right, then we're deemed extremists. And this, I think, it's very important to defend our rights to criticise, whether inside the Labour Party, but more importantly in society as a whole. For example, in education, the Tory government is considering making the use of any sort of anti-capitalism or ideas that oppose the status quo. They're arguing those are not legitimate, that they shouldn't be taught in schools and universities. And, you know, I stand in the tradition of free speech that goes back far into English history, those people who stood up against the repressive monarchies in the past, or those people in continental Europe who stood for free speech against crown or church who were trying to restrict them. So our fight for freedom is also the fight for socialism and the fight for the labour movement.
The man who presided over the Constitutional Convention lived in nearby Virginia at Mount Vernon. His name was George Washington. Though General Washington's slaves lived happily in these quarters, he provided for their freedom in his will.
Why do you not stay in Russia?
Because my father was a slave, and my people died to build this country, and I'm going to stay here and have a part of it just like you. And no fascist-minded people will drive me from it. Is that clear?
You are here because you are promoting the communist cause.
I am here because I'm opposing the neo-fascist cause which I see arising in these communities. Jefferson could be sitting here, and Frederick Douglass could be sitting here, and Eugene Debs could be sitting here.
Now, what prejudice are you talking about? You were graduated from Rutgers. You were graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. I remember seeing you play football at Lehigh. There was no prejudice against you.
Just a minute. This is something that I challenge very deeply. That the success of a few Negroes can make up for $700 a year for thousands of Negro families in the South. My father was a slave, and I have cousins who are sharecroppers, and I do not see success in terms of myself. I have sacrificed hundreds of thousands of dollars for what I believe in.
While you were in Moscow, Mr. Robeson, did you make a speech lauding Stalin?